I'm Trio. Welcome to You've Got This, Sis. I believe there are times we need a sis to see us for who we are, where we are, exactly how we are, and then see all that we can be. The sis that can do that with each of us is a real treasure. I've had my moments, sis. I realize that our connections to one another are absolutely gold. I know there are times that we journey solo, and there are times we journey with others. Both are completely necessary for our growth and increased strength as women. You are here with me, and I am here with you. And we will journey wherever you are now to your best self, always. Welcome to You've Got This, Sis. This month is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and last month was Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And I have the privilege of interviewing a very good friend of mine by the name of Samara. She is a woman of resilience, of fortitude, and she is one of my warrior women and heroes that I look up to. And today she shares a story with us of one of her children by the name of Malcolm, who was diagnosed with cancer when he was 4.5. Go ahead and take a listen and just allow Samara's words to uplift you as they did me. And I hope that you can feel her light through this podcast. You'll notice on many of the social media sites, the balloons. Years ago, when I was getting my first degree and I was in a humanities class, there was description given about balloons and how we may see them in paintings or pictures, and how the color and the balloon itself represent hope and dreams. And I have always loved that about the balloons, and they are incorporated into You've Got This, Sis, as a way of reminding us of hope and that our dreams are there, that they live, and that they are waiting for us to claim them. My friend Samara, she's just really amazing. She and I have gotten to know each other over the past year, and I just love her to death. But she is going to just tell you a little bit about herself. One thing that I want to share with you is that she's an amazing woman, a mom of 8 kids, and she hasn't lost herself.
That's sweet of you.
And I was thinking about this morning, and I might have her share at the end or something, or in the beginning, either way, but a little bit about how she keeps her identity and doesn't lose that amongst being a mom and being a wife and really running kids all the time. But in addition to that, we're going to find out a little bit about how this ties into Childhood Cancer Awareness Month as well. So Samara, tell us a little bit about you, and maybe if you want to address the question of how you haven't lost your identity amongst 8 kids.
That's sweet of you. Let's see. So I have 8 kids. They're ages 17 down to 1. And there's 4 boys and 4 girls. So it goes boy, girl, 3 boys, and then 3 girls.
Awesome.
And they're all unique and different.
Aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. I've said, I think I may have shared with you before, but I've said that when I'm raising my kiddos, that as I'm getting to know them and their personalities, one of the first indications of what's going to work with them is how do they potty train. And so I know 7 different ways of potty training,
oh my goodness.
which means I know 7 different personalities and 7 different styles of learning, and it's just the way that goes with kids.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
But if I were to be asked how I haven't lost my own identity, I think I would be remiss in not mentioning that my husband and I work together. That's one of the big aspects of having both a large family, but
Yeah.
also making sure that I don't lose that
Yeah.
we're equal to the task of what we have to conquer together,
Mm-hmm.
and that we do that together. So
I love that, because Todd does drive the kids around. Todd is very much involved.
yeah.
And, Todd is a university professor and just an amazing family. And
Thank you.
guys, we love watching you. Do you guys have, like, as a couple, do you have a set in stone kind of time for yourself?
We try, yes.
Okay.
So Mommy gets grumpy after bedtime because that's Mom and Dad's bedtime.
Me
Mom
too.
and Dad's mom and dad time.
Yes.
If we are dealing with children from 5 a.m. until I go to sleep, I will lose my mind.
Right.
So there's self-preservation and order.
Mm-hmm.
I really do function off of order. The kids have to have some degree of order. I know that changes. I've seen other moms with lots of kids who don't do that,
Mm-hmm.
but that's one thing that really helps me is we have a calendar and we try and stick to it.
Yeah.
We have a budget meeting that we talk about at the beginning of each month. So we get to look at what are the needs of each of the children, what are each other's needs.
Yeah.
That involves, Todd's social eating out, or if I have engagements that I need to go to, that we're both on the same page of who's going to take care of the children, who's going to take care of that responsibility, and then we both are able to contribute to that.
Sure.
So, so those those aspects of maintaining a home are really important. And the kids have to go to bed on time. And when it was funny because young kids, they'll go to bed pretty,
I know.
stay in bed, or I'm taking away this favorite thing.
Yes.
No, don't do that. Older children, they want to talk, and it's great because I want to talk to them too, but they also need to understand that Mom and Dad need to have our time to talk and that their time is done. So we allow them some time to talk, but then we shut it down and say, okay, it's bedtime. And then we take opportunities at those other times throughout the week to make sure that they're getting their time to download and to talk and to figure out things. So
I love that.
in an
I love
ideal
that there's
world,
order and communication, and it really helps your world
we try.
function.
This is I'm gonna say this is when things are moving smoothly, because
Right.
they don't always move smoothly, but this is in our ideal family situation when things are running smoothly. This is how that goes.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always happen that way.
I love that. Okay, so let's dive into a little bit of the child cancer awareness for this month, and tell us your story on your experience with cancer and your family.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you asked the two questions, because now that I think about it, they go together hand in hand. So May 2013, we were coaching baseball. One of our other kids was involved in soccer, and we limit the amount of activities that they do. But I mean, realistically, I was serving as a Cub Scout committee chairman. My husband was doing a lot of different things with our church, where he was traveling and serving in that respect, and then you've got university life where there's papers and classes and all of the above. So we were really busy.
Yeah.
And we were headed to a soccer game, and I got a phone call and a text that said my grandmother had passed away. And so we said, okay, we got to figure out what to do, because some of the family dynamics of my extended family were such that I was in a position that I needed to be of help. Mm-hmm. So we thought about it and prayed about it, and we got the impression that I needed to go and fly to California. So that would leave my husband, at the time we had 6 kids, and so that would leave him with 5, because the youngest was 6 months old.
Okay.
And so I was in California. He had 5 kids. Malcolm is our 4th child, so he was 4 years old at the time, and he had run a fever. And we said, even though he's sick, kids get sick, they get better.
Yeah.
It's okay. We'll just send me to California and Todd will be home. Well, while I'm taking care of arrangements there, I'm checking in with Todd, and he's saying, Malcolm's not, he's still feverish. I said, okay, go to the doctor. They said, well, come back in a couple of days if he's still feverish. So then about Sunday rolls around and he's still feverish. So we went into an aftercare unit. They said, okay, he's not showing any other symptoms, but if he starts complaining of abdominal pain, come and talk to us. And Malcolm had a couple of health concerns. He was anemic. He had been for a couple months because we had chalked it up to sensory modulation issues, that he was having sensory sensitivity, and so he wouldn't eat certain foods. He had been showing fatigue because we thought because he was in physical therapy, and so he would come home and just kind of lay on the ground and go to sleep. So that was when we found the anemia, and so he was sick, but nothing was off the radar.
Too unusual.
Yeah. And he had so many specialists looking at him that it was just, we're like, he's just sick. Well, Monday rolls around, and in California, I woke up and I just had this feeling. I said, Malcolm needs to go to the emergency room, and he needs to go now. And it was one of those times where you just have this urgent feeling, like something is wrong and it needs to be addressed. There wasn't anything that particularly precipitated it. It just was urgent. So I called Todd and I said, how are things going? He said, well, he's still sick. I said, he needs to go to the ER. Can you take him to the ER? He said, well, he has an appointment for 2:00 today. And I'm meeting with another professor at the home. Do you mind if we just wait? And I'm like, okay, that's fine. If that's what's the plan, that's fine.
Yeah.
Well, they start meeting, and his coworker said, he doesn't look very good. Do you need to go somewhere? And he looks at Malcolm, and Malcolm says, my head hurts. Todd said, I think I better go to the emergency room. So about a half an hour after my phone call, he calls me and said, we're going to the emergency room. And so he left his coworker with the other 4 kids, and he went to the emergency room, and they did a CT scan of his abdomen because he was starting to complain of abdominal pain and of a headache. And they did a CT scan of his head. And the doctor came in and they said, your son is incredibly sick. He has a softball-sized tumor in his abdomen, and he has a tumor in his skull. And you are on the way in an you're getting an ambulance right now, and you're going to the University of Iowa, which is a 2.5-hour ambulance ride immediately. And he was to the point where his iron levels had dropped so low that they were afraid of heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because he was just that far gone. So we were thrust into the world of childhood cancer. And by that night, we found out that Malcolm had stage 4 neuroblastoma, which means that it was at every quadrant of his body, and that the cancer had entered his bone marrow 100%.
Wow. It
was 100% saturated. So he was very, very sick. And that's what started our journey into childhood cancer. And it struck us at a time where we're just busy. Life's going on, and cancer is no respecter of families.
No. Or busyness. And frankly, I mean, who isn't busy? Even if you have 1 or 2 kids, they're usually very involved in things. What were some of your first thoughts when you got the news?
It was terrible. It was really terrible. I knew enough about cancer to know that he probably had cancer, because I got the call that he had a tumor.
Okay.
So when you get diagnosis, it takes a couple days to figure out how things are going on, and we figured it out within overnight because he was in such bad shape. So by the time I ended up getting back, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't overnight. It was about a day and a half before they were able to excise and biopsy and figure out what it was and how it had spread. But nothing else mattered. It was that moment where the stereo silence in my brain. Just I had to make arrangements to get on a plane flight home. That's a whole nother story. I was very much blessed by friendships, and Heavenly Father right from the start showed his hand. God showed his hand in miracles in our lives. So that's another story. But But I remember getting in the car and trying to drive down to, in this case, my sister-in-law was in Sacramento, I was in California, and but I couldn't listen to the radio, which I love to do. I couldn't listen to anything. It was just, everything else was so meaningless. I couldn't understand for that moment how everybody could kind of go on with their life, and there's this innocent child who I'm about to lose, and I don't even know if I'm going to make it home before he's passed away. Like that, that was very difficult. It was very difficult to process. So
Wow.
I just remember the feeling of just silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a stereo silence. That's so true. So what were some of the steps from that point? You made it back to Iowa.
Yeah.
And then where did things go from there?
So they, what they do in cancer treatment is, depending upon the facility that you're at, they have a protocol to follow.
Right.
So we were at a children's oncology group hospital. So their protocol for neuroblastoma would start out with 6 rounds of high-dose chemo, where he would have to be hospitalized during the chemo. Then he would be sent home, and he would wait 2 weeks for the chemo to take effect, finish taking effect, and then recover. So he would be on a 3-week rotation, ideally, if he recovered from the chemo doses and recovered sufficiently in his bone marrow and in his body. So high-dose chemo is no fun.
Tell us about that. Tell us some of the experience you have with that, because people that, or parents that are going through this, it's their first time. And I know everybody's experiences can be a little different, but what was your experience with Malcolm and the chemo?
He had to learn a couple things. And Malcolm is a tremendously tender and non-combative child.
Yeah.
So some of the kids who experience these things, heaven forbid you have to strap a kid in a hospital bed for a certain amount of time attached to all sorts of
lines. IVs. And,
all of that. But he did okay. Did really well. So they had to insert a central line so they didn't have to poke him so much, but they still have to poke him a long line. He had to experience how to throw up, how to pee in a urinal, because they've got to check output and how his levels are doing. He started to lose his hair. One chemo instance, the lining of his bladder started sloughing off, which causes tremendous amount of pain and blood in the urine. Some of the kids experience latent effects of hearing loss. The protocol asked for 6 doses, but in total over his full treatment, he had 10 rounds of high-dose chemo.
Wow.
Yeah. So out of the 10 rounds, he was hospitalized secondarily 8 times. So you get out of the hospital, but your blood levels drop where you cannot defend off of anything. You can't have flowers, fresh fruit, anything, because the bacteria or the viruses, you just can't withstand it. So then you go back into the hospital because you're experiencing a fever, and either you're sick or you've got a serious infection or something. So you're having to deal with some boredom, and you're having to deal with all of that. And fevers are no fun. And then they need to do blood transfusions, and they need to do platelet transfusions. And so sometimes he would react to those. He had one reaction to them where, his whole body went red. It was kind of like a form of anaphylaxis, but he didn't, he didn't stop breathing.
Right.
So you just learn real quick, how they just, and he got cold. Sometimes his temperature regulation was off, so a lot of those things are just not pleasant.
So just to clarify for listeners, when somebody gets chemotherapy, the chemo treatment doesn't just kill all the cancer cells. The chemo treatment actually kills all developing cells, good or bad. And so anybody young or small or old or large, any size, they actually do not have any immune system to be able to fight off anything. And so that's why it's really easy to get sick, and why the secondary visits to the hospital were probably pretty common for Malcolm. Now, Malcolm's the fourth child. What did protocol look like at home?
I was concerned. I was like, you're going to send me home with this child.
Yeah.
We have runny noses, and we have slobber, and we have all sorts of things. And they said, well, the bacteria is at home. He's kind of used to.
Sure.
But yeah, frankly, for the other kids, the cancer journey for a child, especially in a child in a home with other kids, it involves the whole family.
Right.
So the other kids had a great degree of instability. We clearly stopped coaching baseball.
Yeah.
We stopped being involved in sports. We stopped a couple of the things we were involved with was service with our church.
Okay.
We had to just really pull back and focus on his needs because it would require a parent to be in the hospital with him. And then at the drop of a hat, if he ran a fever, we had to be in the hospital within 15, 20 minutes, just because some of the things can be really dangerous if he gets sick. It can be really dangerous. So So for the other kids, it created a degree of instability, and we learned really quick that we didn't have family close by. We had church members that were wonderful and helped us tremendously,
Good.
but we would import family members. So they would come home, and the kids would have aunt so and so, or cousin so and so, or uncle so and so, and they got to know their extended family, and their extended family got to know them and love them very much so. And so we were very much grateful for that. But yeah, at home it was trying to coordinate again was incredibly important. Right. We had been doing regular monthly budget meetings for about a year and a half prior to his diagnosis. Okay. So that was really, really helpful to be on the same page and then to come back and go, okay, what does this look like?
Yeah.
I was very grateful because of our dynamic in our home that my husband was on the front lines.
Yeah.
He was the first one there because sometimes our tendency as moms, and especially as organizational moms, and especially with my personality, to say, I got this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take care of this, and I can do it. Yeah. And not let in other people who should be involved or who could be involved. But it's a very important thing to do. Yeah. So by my husband being there, it taught us that this was a together journey, that we needed to be doing this as a family, that we needed to make sure that the children, that they had responsibilities, that they knew that their duties were important, that they were valued by their participation in the family, that mom and dad can't do this by ourselves. So the dishes, that's your responsibility, and that's how you're helping your brother get well.
That's so good.
And yeah, it was helpful for them.
Yeah.
It was a strain on them, but they learned real quick that, otherwise it would have been worse strained because they would have been left with nothing to do.
Right.
And seeing their brother suffer.
And that was something that they could contribute to help you to be able to be there for him and to show their love for not only you, but for Malcolm as well. And I love that you said it's a together thing. And that's what's so good, is because sometimes we as women like to be hero women and save everybody's day and just, I got this, function beyond our capacity. And then we get burnt out, and then we get really weepy. And when we are in it together with family and with our spouse, the load gets shared, it gets distributed evenly. And so for it to be a together thing, and for Todd to kind of be the one there on the front line, that's awesome.
It was a huge blessing, huge lesson for us that this is how we needed to go forward. And we had to keep learning that lesson over and over. We still have to learn it. Sure. And we still had to learn the lesson that I am someone who likes to take care of other people. Right. I am not someone who likes to be
Malcolm had a series of 10 high chemo treatment doses.
Mm-hmm.
What does that time period look like? 10 doses over how long?
So his treatment would have been, let's see, so May 2013, and then he would have started chemo right away. By the time we hit January 2014, he had done his first 6 rounds, and it was very clear that things weren't working.
Okay.
So the doctors sent out his information to 13 other centers, said, what do we do? How do we address this? Because he's still stage 4 and he's supposed to have no evidence of disease at this point.
Wow.
And so they said, all 13 of them said, you are going to New York. And I looked at them and I said, what are you talking about? Like Manhattan? Yeah, Manhattan. Like you are doing cancer treatments now in Manhattan. And we were in Iowa. So how do we do that with 6 children and a parent that's supposed to be keeping in chemo? Like, what are you talking about? So the time frame at that point, this is January 2014, we figured out that we would be going back and forth for treatments, that they could also work with our local hospital, and that our local hospital was willing to take orders from Manhattan.
Good.
So we ended up doing a couple more rounds of chemo, so 6 rounds followed by a couple more rounds of chemo at our local hospital. They started him on radiation treatments at the primary site and in his abdomen and in his in his skull and part of the orbits of his eyes, because he had tumors all in the orbits and the bone orbits of his eyes as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So did radiation treatment. They were able to reduce the cancer enough to successfully remove 3 tumors, the main tumor and 2 other tumors in his abdomen and up behind his left lung and heart in the shoulder area. And that was wonderful and successful and great, but they were still finding it everywhere. So by the time we reached 16 months from diagnosis, Malcolm had undergone 10 rounds of chemo treatment. He had undergone surgery, radiation treatment, which I do not remember how many rounds of radiation, but it's a regimen that takes several weeks to do. You go for a little bit and then you come. So that one took a while. And then we'd also flown to New York and done a couple of treatments out there that were only available out there because they do experimental treatments. So we were in clinical trials for a couple other therapies. One was like a full body targeted radiation therapy. So he would take radiation into his body. That radiation would target the cancer cells. The cancer cells would absorb the radiation at high doses with the hopes that it would kill only the cancer cells.
Wow.
So they were trying to, avoid that damage you had talked about to the other cells as much as possible. But with radiation and chemo and all of that, it's still bad news.
Well, then I'm sitting here thinking, you're having to get on an airplane.
Yes.
With Malcolm, who has no immune system.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Because that's a whole new layer of the onion.
Yeah. We felt that too, and plane flights are not cheap.
No.
Let's just put that out there, that it is not cheap to get to New York and to keep having to go back and forth to New York.
Well, and those are just cheap seats that are like expensive.
Yeah.
Like that's not even first class or like anything.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I do have to say that there were a couple organizations, and there are some really good organizations that help families with cancer treatments. There's a resource that we went to that I think is worth mentioning called Alex's Lemonade Stand. Yeah. And they have a repository of other organizations that are also helpful in finding what resources we need. So you go to transportation or housing or supplemental, because a lot of the families, they have to quit their jobs.
Right.
So if you have a 2-income home, you're either on FMLA leave, which doesn't last very long, and you don't necessarily get paid for it, but you still have a job. So there's a lot of different resources for families that are mentioned there.
Okay.
But one of those that we picked up on was called Corporate Angel Network, and they had corporations that had empty seats on their executive planes. That if they were already going to New York, we could call and say, hey, do you have an empty seat? And can you take us? And we would be able to go. Okay. So we rubbed shoulders with a lot of really amazing people. And they said, you cannot tell who we are. Wow. So, and these, but all I can say is that these are well-known major corporations that are donating seats for free for us to fly on private jets for these kids to go out and to take care of these things. So, and they can't always do it, right. But there are some people who did amazing things. There was one that took us frequently. We kind of knew their schedule, and that was helpful. Yeah. And there was another one that even said, well, you know, my meeting was canceled, but I'm going to take you anyway.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, that's not cheap.
No.
Not cheap to have your own private jet, to fuel it, to fly as an executive. I mean, we're talking CEOs of big corporations. Yeah. I'm going to just take you to New York and I'll fly home. Like you're driving in a car. Right. And so that was a blessing. But there were other times where they couldn't do it, and so we would have to either pay out of pocket, or we would go to other organizations like National Children's Cancer Society, and they would help us supplement with transportation costs and some of the other things. But there are some groups that help with that. But yeah, that coordination, and again, it takes time. You're on the phone. Yeah. How do you make the appointments? Are you getting? And you have to get scans. You have to wait. There's time. When we were in New York, I would be there for several weeks. Right. And my kids are at home. And I remember when the first times I showed up to we stayed at the Ronald McDonald House, which was wonderful too. This woman comes up to me and she said, oh, you guys are new. You know, hi, nice to meet you. And I said, yeah, nice to meet you. And through the course of conversation, it came up that she had been doing this for 7 years. Wow. And I just about died. Yeah. Because I looked at my children, who at the time were, the oldest was 11. And I said, I'm going to miss their teenage years. I'm going to be going back and forth doing cancer treatments and doing cancer in the best case scenario, I'm going to be going back and forth and doing cancer for how long? And then in the worst case scenario, I'm not doing that, and my son's gone. So it was that wasn't very fun, because we had to process through that, and we had to find joy in either outcome, because was I going to spend 7 years miserable, right, or more or less, and you have to, you can't just sweep it under the rug, but you also have to recognize that we need to choose joy. And that's not just a slogan or some sort of, pathetic, what's it called? Platitude, a platitude. But you really do have to choose.
Well, I'm sure there were moments that you felt despair and you felt discouragement and you felt like this was going to maybe beat you. And not just Malcolm, but you and the family. And, how did you deal with moments like that?
Oh, so I prepared this chart, and you have the physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental aspects that this is all hitting at the same time. You're physically exhausted. You can barely take a shower because you don't want to leave your child alone or in the hands of somebody else, or if they're vomiting, you want to be there, or even if you need a break, or how do you go for a run if you really are the type of parent who needs to go for a run or get some physical exercise, so you're wiped out physically, you're wiped out mentally, because you've got to remember all the chemo treatments and what are the side effects and what's the next treatment protocol, and have the doctors told you this information, what are you going to do next. Emotionally, it's draining, because you're on a roller coaster ride. It's, okay, we're going to do the treatments and we're hopeful, and then you get the scan results and it's not going well. Nothing. And then you say, okay, we're going to try another treatment. Maybe this will work. And then there's scan results and there's nothing. And then there's people around you who, well, what is your child going through? And what is your child going through? And every story I heard, all I could help to myself and think was, yeah, but our situation is worse.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was, as far as his cancer goes and as far as his situation went with age,
Mm-hmm.
he probably landed in top or bottom, how you look at it, but this minuscule percentage of children in that category. That he was 4.5 when he was diagnosed,
Mm-hmm.
that he was high risk because it was everywhere, and that he was still alive and having gone through all the treatments was no evidence of disease. And there's tiny amount of kids in that situation.
Right.
And yet he's still alive. So how do we deal with it? We cried.
Mm-hmm.
And we would talk together.
Mm-hmm.
We talked as a family, and we talked about what ifs a lot. What if this happens?
Mm-hmm.
How do we deal with that? What if mom has to be in New York for 2 weeks? Okay, well, this is how this looks. What if dad has to be in New York for 2 weeks? What does this look like? What if Malcolm passes away? What if he doesn't pass away?
Yeah.
What is it, and then we would process that at quiet times and rely upon others, but that was limited in its scope because everybody has their own situation and they deal with it in so many different ways. And we would trust in Heavenly Father. We believe in a God. We believe in Heavenly Father.
Mm-hmm.
And I had running through my head all the time, trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not to thine own understanding. And be still and know that I am God. And it just kept coming back to me saying, there's somebody else involved in this equation who has my best interest in his sights.
Yeah.
That even though this is terrible and awful and painful, I can grow, and he is expecting me to grow as a result of it, or at least holding my hand through the whole thing, because this is in some way,
Mm-hmm.
all things turneth out for good for those that love God and are called to his purposes. And it's true, because the amount of people, even if it wasn't good for Malcolm,
Mm-hmm.
the amount of people we had coming up to us and saying, I will pray for your son. I will pray for your son. We had thousands of people, literally thousands of congregations around the United States who had Malcolm on their prayer rolls and were drawing themselves closer to God. And I know not everybody believes in God.
Right.
But the positive part about this is they were drawing themselves closer to something that was not their own selves. They weren't focusing on themselves.
Right.
They were drawing themselves closer to another power, another being,
Mm-hmm.
in behalf of this child.
Yeah.
And if anything, that was miraculous to me, because my goodness, how could that not turn out for a good thing for a lot of different people? And in that way it did. I mean, he was suffering, but it did. So
that is an amazing perspective to have. So thank you for sharing that, because, it might be, I haven't had a child with cancer. I haven't had any loved ones like directly around me that I've had to experience this kind of, trial or any situation with. And so I can't even imagine what it was like. And you've been there. And for you to share that perspective of even while my son is suffering, the fact that other people are drawing close to God or a greater being helps me feel joy.
Mm-hmm. It did. It very much did. It made things purposeful. And take it for what it's worth, but it made things purposeful. And then it made it so when we're showing up at the Ronald McDonald House or other places, and Malcolm's saying hi, and there's a big Chinese contingent that was there, and he learned to say ni hao and sai jin and shi shi, and to say thank you, and all of these, and that we could experience the principle of hugging a bear. Mm-hmm. It's like, who hugs a bear? That's terrifying. You know what could happen? Like, you know what could happen?
Like a real bear.
Like a real bear.
Oh my gosh.
Like hugging a bear.
Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah.
But if we focus on what could happen, we miss the fact that we're hugging a rare.
Right.
Like, we're in Manhattan.
Yeah.
Malcolm got a helicopter ride. He was life flighted, but hey, who gets to be on a helicopter ride?
Right.
Who gets to ride private jets? Who gets to do these things? It made it so that we could grow and expand and take joy in those things when it was tremendously clear and devastatingly clear that he was probably not going to beat this.
Okay.
So
after 16 months of treatment and then additional months, how many months total for treatments?
So 16 months of treatments, and then we went into what was called immunotherapy. And immunotherapy was an additional, that was additional 10 rounds. Yeah, and the 10 rounds was went from August through the following, like February, March. July.
Okay.
Following July.
Okay.
And when we went into immunotherapy, I'll have to say that we had to have that conversation with the doctor.
Okay.
They had done everything else, and the scans came back, and he was stage 4. It was still everywhere. It was 5% in the bone marrow, but it was still everywhere, every quadrant of his body. And we said, okay, what are we going for? What's our goal here?
Yeah.
Are we looking at taking care of this and no evidence of disease? Or are we looking at a different goal? And he said, remission, no evidence of disease is an unrealistic expectation at this point. So we are going for life elongation. We're not going for remission any longer. And that was very hard to hear. There was no more tricks in the bag, and Malcolm was going to pass away. And we just had to pick the least bad thing to do.
Wow.
And so they introduced us to immunotherapy, and they said it will not cause damage. Chemo's no longer on the table. It causes damage, and it's not working.
Okay.
But we're going to try immunotherapy and go from there. And the only thing that you have to understand is that it will cause him excruciating pain.
Oh, wow.
Because his cancer is on the nervous system.
Yeah.
And we're causing his body to attack the cancer in one fell swoop. And so he will experience extreme pain throughout his body for these treatments, but it won't cause damage.
Okay.
So we had kind of a choice to make. So.
Well, there's a baby waking up.
I was going to say, I might have to grab her.
1 second.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so we have another visitor here. So if you hear a little bit of goldfish eating, don't be concerned. It's just our new friends. So she's up from a nap, which is awesome. But I want to hear the outcome, and so does everybody else, because stage 4, all over, all sorts of therapies, and it doesn't seem like it's going the way your prayers or your hopes were directed. So tell us.
So what happened was that we went in for immunotherapy with the expectation of what I had said, that this was not geared to work.
Right.
And we did 2 rounds, one in August, one in September, and then would do scans.
Okay.
So you do about a 2-week process. Did scans, and we walked into the doctor's office, and this doctor, like I said, he's seen everything.
Yeah.
And so he's not easily going to be overjoyed or easily going to be dismayed. Because when you see the worst of the worst, you kind of just understand that that's how life goes. Well, we go in, and he's sitting there, and he's smiling. And I'm totally prepared to be sent home.
Okay.
Really, I'm totally prepared that that's what's going to happen.
And you've accepted that Malcolm's going to pass at some point.
Yeah, we're just going to go home.
Okay.
So I walk in, and he's smiling, and he says, I had to check to see if it was the right scans, to see if it was the right child's scans. I had to check the name again because it's gone. The cancer's totally gone.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
Gone.
Yeah.
From stage 4
to gone.
To gone.
After 16 months of nothing working, it was gone.
Wow.
And I that was my reaction. Like, what do you, like, gone? Like, what do you mean gone?
Can you explain that a little more?
That's not.
That doesn't seem to be in the vocabulary.
Gone. He said, well, you know, there's a spot on a skull, but it's not cancer. It's just uptake of, you know, whatever. But it's gone. All of it's gone. And I said, okay. I just was speechless because I was not prepared for that outcome. I wasn't prepared. I had prayed for it. I had hoped for it. I wanted it badly, but everything for 16 months was, this is not going to work. It's not going to happen. So I went for a walk, and for the next 3 miles, I just bawled and cried, and I called my husband, and I don't know why he wasn't there at the time for scans. Like, there's a reason why he wasn't there, and I don't remember why it was. But I called him and to tell him and say it's gone. And I just couldn't stop crying because we had seen so many children pass away. And he said, my husband put it well, he said, it was only at that moment that we said, why us? Why would Heavenly Father, why would God bless us with this? Because the only way this could have happened, in our opinion, the only way, and frankly, in the doctor's opinion, I mean, he was not a man who believed in God, but he recognized that this was highly unusual,
right?
And that it was miraculous. He didn't use those terms, but I used those terms. It was miraculous. Yeah. And we said, why have we been blessed with this miracle? And we were blessed with a miracle. And there are multiple answers to that. There are multiple answers to that, but factually, our family was blessed to have Malcolm around, and now it's been almost a little over, what is that, timeline-wise? We are at 4.5 years post-treatment. We're coming on 5 years post-treatment. And that's a really big milestone for kids in cancer areas, of that the primary cancer is not there anymore. Now, the risk of secondary cancers is always there. It will be there for the rest of his life. We go back every 6 months. He has latent effects of all of the treatments. We had to go back every 3 months for the first 3 years to New York, and to get scans and tests, and, you know, every time thinking, is it back? Right. Is it back? And so now we're at a blessed place, but that's where we're at for the outcome, is that he is in tremendously good health for what he went through. There's like 96% of kids who have problems with something because of the treatments afterwards, 96%. So he's not unscathed. But when it comes to what could be, he looks pretty good. He doesn't have to wear hearing aids. A lot of kids have to wear hearing aids. He's on a lot of endocrine treatments because his pituitary gland is shot. He's doesn't grow very well. A lot of the kids do not grow well. Their bone structure changes because of radiation and other things. He doesn't have leukemia, thankfully, because that's one of the risks of the chemos is leukemia, or like I said, other bone cancers. So we are in a very good place right now, but we feel tremendously blessed to be in a very good place, because not everybody, that's not the case, especially for a kid who's gone through that much.
Right. Well, I'm glad you shared that too, because, you know, hearing about the miracle, yes, you're saying hi, hearing about the miracle, you know, and knowing how much he's gone through, it is good to paint a picture for parents who might be experiencing, you know, a diagnosis of cancer with their child, to kind of be able to see what you've gone through, and some expectations of, you know, of the side effects of what have occurred for Malcolm. And I will tell you though, Malcolm just lights up the room. He has infectious hugs, and that, we were talking yesterday, is one of his gifts
Mm-hmm.
is that he spreads happiness wherever he goes.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday he was even telling me about, we were talking about what gives you comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to a whole group of children his age, and he's 10, right?
Mm-hmm. Just turned 11.
Just turned 11.
Yeah.
So we were just talking about, well, what gives you comfort? Mm-hmm. And he told me, he goes, well, my chemo duck. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what's that? Like a stuffed animal or a real duck? What is this? And he goes, yeah, it's a stuffed animal. It's what I was given when I first was getting my rounds of chemo. And it's been with me ever since. And it gives me comfort. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, what an incredible young man to have faced everything he's gone through, and your family to have faced everything that you all have gone through. Of course it was hard, but probably one of the great outcomes is probably that you guys were made closer, even though you were at distance from each other at times. But really creating that unity within your family system, your family.
Well, and I think that when we talk of hope, I mean, clearly the main hope of parents with children with cancer is that the cancer will go away, mm-hmm. and that they will have their child, and even if that child has to experience all these terrible effects afterwards, mm-hmm. That child will still have the opportunity to learn and grow. But that is not reality. So we need to find hope in something else sometimes. Mm-hmm. So we hope for the best, plan for the worst, and still try and maintain hope for the worst. So how do we do that? And it's the journey. It's like your original question, not losing yourself. How do we do that through this? We maintain hope and we find joy while you're doing it. Because then it's, okay, well, no matter what the outcome, I'm still going to be here.
Right.
My children are going to be here. We've got to figure this out. Yeah. And that doesn't dismiss the fact that it doesn't dismiss bad feelings.
Sure.
You can feel grief and frustration and anger and all of these negative emotions. I'm going to call them negative emotions.
Yeah.
You can experience those while at the same time having a hope and a glimpse of joy and having faith, mm-hmm. and all of these things. They're not mutually exclusive. They can exist at the same time. And recognizing that that's the case, yeah. is part of maintaining our personal identities and maintaining hope.
I love that. So always having hope, mm-hmm. but always being able to be in the reality of what's going on as well, and not losing hope. Mm-hmm. Always not losing hope. Mm-hmm. And so it's been amazing. Thank you for sharing your story and for sharing Malcolm's story. And so,
thank you.
I mean, yes, Malcolm is a walking miracle today.
Thanks.
And I hope this story has given you hope. I hope that the story has also given you a little bit of an experience of really the reality too of what a child with cancer or having a child with cancer can mean. And it doesn't mean that there's an answer tomorrow. It doesn't mean that the cancer is cured tomorrow. It often is a test of time. And that's one thing I really admire about you guys too, is you're very resilient.
You're sweet.
And resilient.
It doesn't feel that way sometimes.
But look at everything you've
sweet.
gone through. I mean, and resilience isn't something that just happens. It's a process. Mm-hmm. It's choosing that you're going to be strong even in the moments that you feel really weak.
Yes.
And being able, like you said, to allow both emotions. Mm-hmm. And kind of at times, a lot of times, probably taking the step forward even when you don't want to. Yes. Because that's what has to be done. And if you let your emotions rule, it wouldn't have occurred. So really just being courageous and always taking the step forward for your children and for your families. So any last words that you would want to leave others who maybe just received a diagnosis of cancer within their family.
Let's think about that for a second. Let's see. I would say, don't lose hope.
Mm-hmm.
I would counsel that you lay out what your priorities are now, and don't deviate from them, and consider it a journey. There's a lot of people who consider it a fight, and it is, but understand that there's very little control that you have. There's just very little control. So, because even if we did the right treatments, we weren't guaranteed the outcome.
Right.
So even if we did the right things, it wasn't going to happen. So just make sure you're pulling together, not pulling apart. Make sure you maintain those priorities as a family and really dig into what are your values and do it together and work through it together.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Together, being loyal to each other, loyal to the family. There's actually strength in leaning on one another, even in the hardest times where you want to pull apart. Don't. Lean on each other and allow each other to have those times of grief, of crying, of tears, maybe even allowing the grace to occur when somebody's not having their best day. Those are all things that are going to pull you together and allow you to work through things together.
And when you can't, seek out resources and help to try and figure out, just to try and work through it. It's hard for everybody involved. It brings out the worst and the best. It can do both. But just realize that there's a lot of really good people in this world, really good people, and they come from all sorts of different sources.
Yes.
And be a blessing to others and rely upon others in that way. Draw upon other people's strengths as you're going through it, because it'll be a blessing to you and to them. That would be.
Thank you, Samara.
Yeah.
This has been so nice to visit with you. Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
I'm so grateful that Samara was with us today. She and Malcolm have joined forces and have written a book that is very dear to Malcolm's heart because, as she mentioned, he had blood drawn very often while in the hospital. And because he was dehydrated and very sick, his veins were not always easy to find. And so Malcolm has written a story about one of his heroes named Jared. And you can find Malcolm's book on Amazon. It is called Jared the Blood Genie, and it's written by Malcolm Warren Thornock. And you can find the link in the notes if you'd like to order that and support Malcolm and his desires to impact the world and to share his story and really lift another child and help them through the scary and the hurt as he waded through it himself. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope that you have an amazing day and week. Until next time, sis, be sure to remember that you've got this. Also, go on and check out ygtsis.com. There you can find out what we're up to, podcasts, YouTube videos, and even the shop. Don't worry, it's a great place to be. It's a little bit of unwinding. It's a whole lot of real, and it's exactly what you need. Go check it out, ygtsis.com.